before I started this podcast, I was a little my life was a little bit rudderless. I didn't know what I was really doing, what I wanted to do with my life, and when this idea for the podcast came up, my immediate feeling was, well, who want to listen to me talking about mindset, about my worldview, blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. And I was really dragged into doing it. My self-confidence and self-belief were, kind of quite low, I guess. I've talked to, like, over the 4 years, I've talked to amazing artists, many of whom, with incredible bravery, really bear the inner sanctuary of their own mind through their music and in particular their lyrics. So here we are, like 4 years into it, and I've learned so much about myself. It's been really cathartic for me to have these conversations. Not least, it's helped me face my fears and it's forced me to, in a way, I guess, sort of face myself. And there's still those moments when the self-belief, kind of looks at me sideways and goes, "Really?"
Mm.
I think the world is incredibly complex. It's very uncertain. It's very volatile, and definitive answers are so much harder to come by. Reality is challenged almost, it feels like, every day. What you believe to be reality is challenged. Answers to big questions can't really be condensed into these sort of one sentence sound bites, which is what our wonderful feudal tech overlords demand from us. Um,
Mm.
I know that there may be, never be answers to some questions where, there are things that are out of my control and where I need to challenge, an outdated definition of perfection, for example. Yeah, accepting this in how I live my life can be challenging, especially as I get older and become, more risk averse in some aspects of my life, yet, willing to take more risk in other aspects. So, as usual, I can hear you thinking, okay, where am I going with this? Well, my guest today is ready to release her second and utterly beautiful album called "I Still Want to Share," which to me captures this sort of complexity and uncertainty of our world and really sort of pitches it against our innate human need for simplicity and certainty. And I know that our chat about her album and her life will really sort of raise some fascinating observations. So it's a welcome to Sophie Jamieson. Thank you, Sophie, for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Giles.
Not at all. So, yeah, I like with these intros as I've kind of gone. I guess I've sort of bared my soul a little bit, and uh, I enjoy sort of talking about these sort of big things in the world. But I mean, I'm really interested in. I guess it's a big sort of question, but your kind of take on these sort of big things that are happening in the world and how they relate and how these have affected your music, your life, whatever.
Um, by the big things.
Big thing, I guess
Um,
yeah, I guess like
yeah,
this kind of
all of
complexity,
those.
yeah,
Yeah.
I realize that's a huge sort of starting point, but it sort of feels like things are changing so quickly. It's kind of hard
Mhm.
to, you know, I don't know if we're kind of ready as humans to sort of deal with this sort of speed of change that's going on.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's affected me enormously over the last year in
Mm,
particular. I think maybe the album that I'm putting out is a symptom of um like a deeper personal um unrest and
mm,
uncertainty. But I found my last year of writing or year or so um has been um I think that the particularly condensed upheaval of the last year with the war on Gaza and
mm,
climate change and Trump
mm,
and like politics in the UK and attacks on all kinds of minorities.
yeah,
Um
yeah,
I've it's actually completely changed my relationship to my writing
mm,
and the way I think about what I'm doing as a musician. And it's interesting. I'm doing all of this doing like some promo and press around
mm,
this album right now, and I really I don't know if I'll be able to make something quite like this ever again, because this album is very, not to overuse the word, I think everybody's albums are incredibly personal.
Mm,
This one feels particularly like a personal excavation of, you know, the way that I operate internally, and
mm,
um, how that manifests in relationship with other people.
mm,
Um, and although I'm not like stopping exploring that, now I can kind of almost only conceive um of exploring how I'm um operating within the world outside of me more.
mm,
And I don't know, kind of trying to make that link more.
mm,
I think I'm already like feeling a bit disconnected from being able to go quite so deep into the subject of this album,
mm,
which in a way is really sad, but also it's begun to provide some very interesting insights and and it's been like uh yeah, it's been about a year and a half of trying to figure out how to write, and I only really started to get there in the last couple of months.
mm,
Um, but it's yeah, it's tough because in a way you kind of have to look at yourself in a much harsher light, and it's kind of when you're looking at how what your role is and what your responsibility is in this world
mm.
is actually like it's infinite. It's
Yeah.
not just your own little personal bubble anymore. I don't know. That's a very
I
long answer to your
no, no,
first
no,
question.
no. It's no. You're right. I mean, I think I think you're completely right. I think it's an interesting one. How almost like um, the length of time from for a musician to to write a piece of work to then it being released. Given the sort of the this I guess like the sort of the speed of change in the world and sometimes the severity as well. It
Mm,
it and I think for people who are not putting themselves in a bubble, to avoid talking about these issues, that brings up challenges because the what's happening affects you quite heavily. Certainly for me, and it sounds like for you as well. Kind of quite heavily. And I can imagine if I was a musician, sort of writing something, 3 years ago, it would look, or 2 years ago, even possibly a year ago, it would look distinctly different if I
yeah,
started writing now. Those um, influences, those sort of inputs that come into you have seem to have changed drastically.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They have, and yeah, it's a it's felt very much like growing pains,
Mm,
in a way, um, because you kind of I've found it's been very difficult to be the level of patient that I think is required when the source of your writing is beginning to change. Um,
yeah, yeah, it's a good point.
and I've really struggled with that over the last year.
Mm,
And even now, I'm finding it, I've been finding it difficult to sit down and write because it's actually really quite painful to sit
mm,
down and examine myself in a way that is required right now. Is
mm,
that the album that I'm releasing, none of those songs were difficult to write, and that they all wanted to come out. They were all like at my
mm,
fingertips. Um, and they all needed to be expressed. And I think what some of the stuff I'm writing at the moment, I have to force myself to sit down and do it, because otherwise I just I really just don't want to look at it the rest of the time.
Interesting. Yeah.
But when I
What?
do, something something ends up surprising me, um
Mm,
or teaching me something, and
the,
it's
the
a
the
hard work right now.
the songs on the record. I mean, were they? Did they sort of come from almost a kind of stream of consciousness? Like it's that this is what was what we're listening to, or what we're going to listen to, is what was basically there inside you, and it's come out in this kind of stream of consciousness.
Um, in in some way, in that the songs on the record were written over um over like 2 or 3 years.
Mm,
Um, and um they've overlapped with the writing of my first album, and also what I'm working on now. So,
mm,
they didn't come out all together. Some of them some of them are, kind of in little chapters of time.
mm,
Um, but I think they do have in common I think they're the kind of songs that, yeah, like when a song is bursting to come out, and
mm.
you don't have to think about it that hard,
Yeah.
and it manages to express exactly what you didn't know you felt like. I think a lot of them are those kind of songs.
Mm.
Um, and those are wonderful songs to learn from in retrospect, because they're peppered with um connections with each other that, I don't notice till years later, or
Mm.
little phrases that I didn't understand until now. And
Mm. Mm.
there's a lot that I love
Interesting.
about that. Um, but yeah,
It's
I feel like
interesting. Yeah, sorry, sorry,
no, go
Sophie.
on. No,
I
no,
was just,
really.
I was just going to, I was just going to say, it's interesting, isn't it? That almost like that hindsight, when you kind of look back and then it starts to make sense. You don't
Yeah.
perhaps realize it at the time. It's like, oh yeah. I mean, I've had a few of those sort of moments just in my life recently,
Mm,
and things that perhaps didn't make sense. About even as long a time ago as when I was a kid, which is
mhm.
a long time ago. They it's only then that the things start to fall into place, and that is such a weird feeling.
Yeah.
It's almost like
Yeah.
it's like sometimes like sort of feel like, okay, I mean, not maybe saying living a lie is too strong, but it kind of feels like there's been something that missing something has putting that in place kind of changes so much for how you've lived your life when you then look back at it.
I think there's something very comforting about identifying a pattern, or connecting like something that happened a long time ago with something that happened recently. I think like the
Mm,
mystery of why can carry a lot of shame, and a lot of like
yeah,
deep disbelief in um the idea that you have done your best, or
yeah.
that you're a good person, or that's why therapy can be really great. um
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's very
I
true.
mean,
It's interesting. I was yeah, I mean I was for a brief period I was sort of in therapy, and ostensibly it was to talk about my relationship with my parents. And then my mum got seriously ill, and so the kind of therapy had to be sort of put to one side while I was sort of dealing with that. But yeah, it was kind of really interesting. It started to, yes, and when you say about the when you start to explore the why completely, that starts to get quite difficult. If that's the right
Mm.
word.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's also I, I think there's like difficulty and comfort both in it, but when you find that you're actually an explainable
Mm,
um human being, um I think that can bring a lot of relief.
mm,
Um it's like so I think something I really try to keep in mind these days is yeah, I recently learned that I'm what is called a highly sensitive person.
mm,
And um, it means that yeah, I'm sort of a hyper vigilant
mm,
human being. I am constantly um, uh, on the lookout for people's physical responses to what, like I'm like hyper analyzing facial expression and body language and tone of
yeah,
voice and all of this stuff. And it means that a lot of the time I'm wondering if I'm just wrong about everything I'm interpreting about everyone and that it's all too
yeah,
much. But then I can't, maybe I heard it somewhere, or maybe even just a friend said to me, if Sophie, if somebody makes you feel a certain way in the way that they talk to you or something they say,
mm,
um, it just because you're sensitive, it doesn't mean that your that your bodily response is wrong. Like if there's
mm,
something that makes you feel like that, there's a reason for it,
yeah.
It's not actually, it's not nothing. My God, I can't remember how I started talking about this. I'm obviously raring to go on this topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think no, we kind of like we were talking about sort of therapy, and then how
Yeah.
um you kind of then relate, kind of like near events to versus past events. Now you can kind of then
Yeah.
sort of like you can start to then sort of assimilate those, there being a sort of
Mm.
comfort in it. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean about the kind of sensitive person. I think that is that that shows kind of like sort of self-awareness and sort of empathy, for how you're feeling and how perhaps how you make other people feel as well.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, I think, and that takes a lot of energy as well, doesn't it? It's a lot of energy
It
when you
does.
when you're dealing with that. I mean, you will obviously, but dealing with that, all day, every day is
Yeah.
difficult.
I mean, it's interesting. I think in the last year or so, along the theme of um yeah, the sort of recent uh upheavals in the world, I'm starting to notice that rather whereas like 2 years ago or more, I'd feel overwhelmed by emotion in some way and I would, sit down and write and process that way.
Mm,
And now that is actually too overstimulating a concept. Um
right. Yeah.
my instinct is like I need to like hide in my room,
Mm,
um I don't know, put on something on Netflix to just like calm me down and
yeah. Yeah.
a hot water bottle and like self-soothe in like a more sort of emergency type situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not sure if I've just become more sensitive or whether I'm just more aware of it or things around me are more overstimulating than they were before. I don't know.
mm,
But I've really noticed the impact on creativity is
mm.
different. Um, or my relationship to it is a bit different now.
I mean, going if we may go back to
Yeah.
when you were a kid, because I always think I've done a lot of this recently. Thinking back to when I was a kid and thinking of kind of things that stick have stuck with me. Whether those are people, things that happened, my physical environment.
Mhm.
There are things that have stayed with me, things that I can remember that are almost crystal clear, still,
Mm.
crystal clear, whether they're good things, bad things, or whatever. Um, and I just sort of, I mean, those things clearly have shaped me through life. I mean, what for you when you were a kid? I mean, what are the sort of those kind of formative influences?
Um, well, I probably I don't want to go too
No, sure, sure.
deep into it, so as not to um
No, no, sure.
like
Only to the extent you're
uh,
comfortable, Sophie. Honestly.
yeah, no, of course. But yeah, probably like stuff like I'm an only child, and when I was growing up, my parents both um were
Yeah.
working really hard because my they were supporting my grandparents who
Mm,
came over from Iran in the early 70s. So I was like um went to a lot of childminders after school and stuff, and
yeah.
um I I think that's when I started to get very creative. Like I kept myself
Mm,
entertained as a little
mm,
girl. I loved making things out
yeah.
of left whatever cardboard things, boxes, loo rolls, anything lying
Mm,
around. Um, I'd make everything. And yeah, I think I was a bit of a little bit of a lonely kid.
mm, mm,
Um, like I don't think I could have identified that at the time, but I knew that I loved going around to friends' houses. Like
mm.
I'd pester my mum to let me go to some so and so's house after school
Yeah.
because they had video games and I didn't, or they had toys that I didn't, and also
Yeah.
there were just like people around and more
Mm,
kids and brothers and sisters at their places, and
yeah.
I think it hurt my mum's feelings sometimes. She
Mm.
felt like, she wasn't company enough. And of course she wasn't, I
You're
was
a kid.
not
Yeah.
interested in
Mm.
her.
Yeah.
Um, um, but yeah, and I think my mum like was under quite a lot of strain to keep me um entertained enough
Mm,
and I think it was a not the easiest on either of us, like
yeah.
growing up together. Um, but yeah, I think you know, it's oddly enough, yeah, I think I was going over some of this in my therapy session the other day.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
just sometimes when you think of your own childhood, like there's an atmosphere that you
yeah.
remember that's hard to
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
put a finger on. And it's funny that you can even like remember an atmosphere because
It
it's
is,
a
isn't
very
it?
abstract thing to have the language for at that age.
You're totally
Um,
right. You're totally right. I mean, I was. I'm an only child as well, and
yeah.
so I understand you from that perspective. My dad was working, my mum wasn't. Um, but the thing about loneliness is interesting. I mean, I kind of grew up with friends on the street that we lived in. I was born in the north of England,
Oh,
and the street that we lived on, there were kind of kids my age, bit older, bit younger, so it was quite a sort of mix. And this is when I
mm,
was kind of pre-secondary school. So yeah, kind of primary, up to primary school age. But then then my mum and dad sort of took me out of school and put me in a school that was away from my friends. And so I would get back from school much later than them.
Yeah.
And, and as a consequence, I kind of got left out of things.
Wow.
So I totally kind of hear you on that sort of loneliness. And I mean, on the positive side, I think I learned to be comfortable in my own company. I still have friends, but it was just much more effort to. Yeah, I still have friends. I was putting that in there quickly. Just you probably noticed that, but no,
Good for you.
I kind of it was just much more effort to sort of see them, and I was disappointed, and I kind of like I was disappointed with mum and dad for doing that. But I did get comfortable in my own company, and learning, finding ways to kind of keep myself occupied. Actually, I ended up sort of playing the cello when I was a kid as well. That was one thing that sort of kept me quite occupied. Um, but yeah, it's interesting how those things work. I mean, what sort of I mean, with the as you kind of move through sort of childhood, what sort of people were you sort of gravitating towards, and where were you sort of hanging out and stuff like that?
That's an interesting question. Um, yeah, no, wow, great. Um, my my friends were mainly the emo kids
Mm,
through my teenage years.
yeah.
Um, though to be honest, I'm one, and I'm still getting my head around this because I'm noticing it in the way that I move within the music scene around me.
Mm,
But I'm one of these people who I have my toe in many different groups, and I'm
mm,
not in the middle of any of them. And I yeah, I don't fully subscribe to
mm,
any uh I identity or like full yeah, I don't like dive deep into any
mm.
scene properly or group of
Yeah.
people.
Interesting.
Um and like yeah, that's the way it was at school. I was sort of I think I had a main group of friends in secondary school, and these were like the
Mm,
slightly more emo kids, but I had different friends too, um and I think in that sense I've always felt uh a bit unsure of whether was lonely or not, or
mm,
like whether I belonged or not. And
yeah.
no, I think I got a bit upset at some point over the last year or so because I feel like there are all these little scenes around me in London,
Yeah.
and they all seem to have such a, a strong sense of what they are and who's
Mm,
in and like who's playing in whose bands and who's going on tour with who,
mm,
and I think I had a moment of like, oh, I feel like I know so many people, but I'm not like I don't belong anywhere. And then
mm, mm.
I just realized that this is the way I've always been.
Yeah.
And that actually like it's I think I also in line with being an only child, I also am very self-sufficient.
Mm,
I am very comfortable in my own company. I also like to have control over my environment, and
yeah.
uh, I need to, not be somewhere when I don't want to be there, and I need to be able to take myself out of an environment if I don't I'm not in the right headspace, and
Mm,
I don't think that I actually could just be amongst one group of people all the time. I don't think it works for me, and I think I've subconsciously lived a life thus far where um I yeah, I kind of drift
Yeah,
in
no, I
between
hear you.
several smaller groups.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, even though I was on the edge of the emo kids at school, I still didn't really get it.
yeah, yeah.
I yeah, I don't know. I loved them. I think they were really emotional people and they
Mm,
were overwhelmed by their emotions and they coped with it in that
mm.
way. And I think I was like, I get this, but not fully. So I don't know. I think they were the
Interesting. No,
most
it's
comfortable
interesting.
people for me to be around.
I think it's really interesting. There must be some link to to our own identity with this and the almost what would be the word? I guess sort of tribal nature,
Mm,
of sort of association. How we gravitate towards a certain bunch or we don't. And
yeah.
I was in a way I was the same. I've always I guess sort of found it quite easy to move between people that are clearly very different.
Mm,
In whether that's in their interests. It doesn't mean that I would want to, really kind of like absorb myself into sort of particular groups, but I can, I guess, kind of understand, that people have this different. I think it's something to do with perhaps being an only child and just sort of having that awareness
mm,
almost and a bit and perhaps empathy and sort of understanding that not everybody's the same, people are different. I've never felt a need to be part of a group. It's never or never felt it. I mean, maybe I've deliberately sort of stayed away from it and sort of similar to you, sort of stayed on almost on the periphery. Maybe there's a I don't know. I'm just thinking, really thinking aloud. I've not really thought of this before, but maybe there's a kind of subconscious design not to or fear of going too far in with
mm,
people.
yeah.
Perhaps I don't know. Um, I know that with certain friendships over the years, I've let them go far too easily.
Mm,
I know I have. But yeah, it's kind of interesting those sort of parallels with with what you were describing of
mm,
um, must being on maybe not on the outside, but not certainly not in the center. I'm certainly like that.
yeah. I wonder if there's a certain element of um like mistrust of
Mm,
um like of being fully one thing or another, or I feel like maybe with me there's an element of, oh, if I go all the way in, then I'm not free to leave when I
Well,
need.
that's a really good point. I'm glad yeah, you've perhaps hit the nail on the head for me. Because I've definitely had issues with mistrust, with where I've trusted people and I've been, kind of badly let down
Mm,
over the years. And yeah, that could well be it.
yeah,
Interesting.
and I guess a lot of this stuff probably also comes down to um like yeah, your relationship to, your key parent as a
Mm,
child, and
yeah,
um how secure or insecure you felt, and whether you can, feel secure around the people around you, or whether you need to be able to escape quickly,
let's get out of
or
it quickly. Yeah.
yeah, or whether you need to like knuckle down and be somewhere where you're safe. I don't know.
Mm,
It's
mm,
I reckon that's probably an element as well.
yeah. How much?
Interesting.
How much of you like with when these kind of things that are happening, or just generally in your life? How much does your kind of instinct? What sort of role does that have in your life? Your kind of gut instinct.
In terms of like uh relationships with people, or
I,
like
I,
around groups and stuff.
I guess yeah. I mean, I guess in any. But I mean, if
Mm.
you'd rather sort of talk about music, about your creativity, but generally,
Mm.
how you live your life.
Um, I think I spend a lot of time listening really hard to my gut and then
Mm,
realizing I'm not sure whether it's my gut or just my anxiety.
mm,
Then trying to
mm,
distinguish those two things
yeah.
um is like a hazard of being highly sensitive and hyper vigilant is
Mm,
sometimes it's actually very hard to tell whether
mm,
you need to listen to that voice.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm still trying to work that out. I I've I have a history of when in the recording process, um, like um thinking I know when something needs addressing.
Mm,
And I think probably like 80% of the time I'm right and I'm happy that I, said, no, let's try that again, or let's
mm,
try this, or let's add that, or let's change that. And
mm,
then there's like a final 20% where I have actually entered into um just hyper perfectionism, needing to control, like I'm
mm,
feel like I'm losing something and I just need to like flog the horse until I feel like I've done enough
yeah.
work. And
Yeah.
then I have, and I know exactly where it's happened. Um
Mm,
I've taken away from the work because I'm listening to the part of me that is terrified and needs to hold on to something.
mm,
Um and so yeah, and I think actually that's gotten worse over the last year. And
mm,
um I'm making some choices now, or at least I intend to when the time comes about when I next get into the studio and how I'm gonna do things. And I
yeah.
think um it's gonna take making sure I'm working with the right people, but
Yeah.
it's I'm gonna need to like really challenge myself to uh come so far out of being allowed to do that.
Mm.
Um and it's gonna take like a lot of trust. um
This is the perfectionism.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Yeah,
it's yeah, I've been so far, I mean, I've loved the way that I've made a lot of my music so far.
yeah.
It's worked for me in so many ways.
Mm,
um but I have really noticed with this last record that given the opportunity to keep making changes, um I will just keep making
you'll keep
changes.
making them. Yeah.
And it's actually, it like damages me in the
Mm,
process if I'm allowed to do that unchecked.
yeah.
And I
No,
think
I completely understand.
yeah, and I think that next time I do it, I need to do a lot more live recording. I need to do it all in like a limited amount of time,
Mm,
and I need to be ready to let go of lots of things that I thought were going to be one way.
yeah.
But I think the only way to make that happen is to do it quite drastically. I think
Mm.
if you give me an inch, I'll take a mile. um,
I
yeah.
know I know what you mean. I mean I've had this kind of this sort of tension between one side of me that is quite analytical
Mhm.
and and then the other side of me which is my instinct, and the two sort of pull at each other sometimes, and
Mm.
I've learned to trust my instinct far more in the last, I don't know, 5 6 years maybe.
Uh-huh.
And the majority of times my instinct is right, As I think it
Mm,
is, for probably for sort of most people, your instinct usually isn't far off. Maybe it
mm,
varies a little bit between people, but it's getting your mind around it, and being able
yeah.
to actually do it. And it was interesting. I remember in like one of my early podcast episodes, I had a producer and engineer on. He worked for Richie Kennedy. He worked at Alan Mulder's studio, the battery, Assault and Battery Studios.
Oh,
And he said that sometimes that the role of a producer or an engineer is to is to really understand the artist and to what makes it tick and to look out for these kind of things where perhaps some practices are um perhaps not helpful
mm,
in the long run. But
yeah,
you're right that you need to have that trust there that
yeah,
whoever's there helping you out, that you're comfortable with, with what they're saying. It's a tough one. This is where kind of personality matters, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's a beautiful thing that as well. And it's such a it's a quite an amazing process to go from, you know, meeting someone,
Mm,
saying maybe like maybe let's work together, and then
yeah,
you actually enter into an incredibly intimate
mm,
relationship,
yeah,
which hopefully produces something really magic.
yeah.
It's wild, really. Um, I mean, I've had an absolutely incredible time working with Guy Massey,
I
the
was just about to
producer.
say, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he was, I mean that's kind of exactly what we did. I'd I had started making this record with somebody else and it didn't go well, and
Mm,
I was kind of crushed by that process and came to Guy
yeah,
having been recommended him by a friend,
yeah,
and he just sat me down with a cup of tea and said, so what happened with that guy, and what didn't work, and what are you looking for?
yeah,
And kind of like gave me like a mini producer therapy session, which
yeah,
was honestly exactly what I needed. And then
yeah,
a couple of weeks later, we spent 2 days in the studio and made a song, like recorded one of the album tracks, and it was just so fun and
mm,
easy and
yeah,
playful, and like uh yeah, it was just wonderful. I feel so lucky to have worked with him.
yeah.
Um,
That's incredible.
but it's really interesting. I'm also kind of in the same vein of moving between friendship groups.
Mm,
I kind of feel now like I've made that album in this way with this person. Um, I know it works.
yeah,
Should I do that again? Um, and my the reasonable, and I've thought about this so much. I've been like, well, so if I I think that I've loved Guy producing and engineering the most, and I think that Izzy, who mixed my last album, I think like maybe to get the best of everything for the next one, like Guy can produce, and then maybe Izzy can mix, and then that would all make a lot of sense, and I can use this and that person. But then
mm,
this like little heart voice in me is saying, no, Sophie, let's go and see what else is out there, and like let's like
mm,
expand our musicality by letting some new person come and bring out something new and show you something that you haven't done, or
mm.
something that you can do. And yeah, so I think, yeah, I'll probably go
It's
and
interesting. Yeah. Wow. That's
flit off again.
gosh. Those are real kind of conundrums, aren't they? Of you know, uh, what you're looking for. Is it is it development? Is it, kind of like creative development, or is it you looking to improve in some way? And I don't know, like I don't know. In some ways, with our world, sort of generally. I'm not talking about kind of music or you, just sort of generally in world about this idea of bettering things.
Mm.
We could, the world is a little people are a little bit obsessed with doing better,
Yeah.
and that feels like it's almost like it's an unattainable situation to be in. You're
Mm.
constantly sort of trying to better it. It feels like it's always going to be out of reach, and it feels like to me, put the energy to doing something different, something that you haven't done before. That might be the exciting part. That might be what gives you the real sort of stimulus.
Yeah.
So maybe you kind of like sort of fine margins in how they're defined, but do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
doing different things. That's kind of exciting. And I know some people that sometimes pushes you out of your comfort zone, and not everybody is wants to do that. I totally understand that. But
It's
yeah,
it's it's very scary. It's exciting, but it's also terrifying.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Especially when you found something that does work. I think the question starts to be, do you want to like just find a groove in which you know what
mm,
works, or
yeah,
like it depends what you're trying to do.
yeah,
Um, and I think for me, it's kind of made me think about um what I want to get out of myself.
mm,
And I think I've for a long time had an overwhelming feeling that I haven't. I've always felt like I'm behind in life in
mm,
a lot of ways. I haven't experienced enough. I haven't pushed myself enough. I haven't done enough of this or that and the other.
mm,
And I think I have a bit of an aversion to being in one place
mm,
forever or doing the
mm,
same thing. Like it's like I work in hospitality and I find that I have to change job at least every 2 years, absolute maximum. Otherwise, my brain
mm,
just starts to die. I just have
mm.
I have to I just have to
Totally.
change into a new environment or move house or whatever. And at the
Mm,
same time, I'm constantly complaining that I feel unsettled and I just want
mm.
to to
Yeah, yeah,
like slow down and be in one place and actually yeah and in some way I think that is kind of the energy that this album like flows upon as a feeling of um like why won't somebody take me in, like where is home, where do I belong, and then when I get
mm,
there I'm
mm,
actually I need to get out, and I don't want to I know that there's something more,
mm,
and actually the something more is um something within me that I haven't tasted yet, um
yeah,
and I don't know, maybe that's a whole other thing that I've got that I should work through at some point,
mm,
and I don't think it's necessarily about getting better or being better. I feel like it's about feeling alive and
alive. Yeah,
um and like tasting your own uh like corners of your own self.
I
Is it's
completely
so
agree.
easy
Yeah,
to try and get like it's so easy, and I find myself like self-soothing in the evening after a long day, and I'm like, I can't, please don't make me write music. I don't want to face my feelings. I just want to,
mm,
watch Superstore on Netflix for four
yeah,
hours.
yeah, yeah.
um and then the next day I'll be like, oh my God, like I need to see five people and
Mm. Well,
cycle all over London.
yeah. I mean, then the kind of like the city is quite draining as well. There is this sort of feeling I'm kind of missing out on stuff. I need to see these, and it's kind of tough, when you're dealing with information that's coming into your brain at like ridiculous amounts that you can't possibly absorb.
Mm.
It's totally right and understandable that you want to kind of take yourself away from that and just give your brain time to kind of recover from it.
Yeah.
And especially that, given what you're saying, the kind of the theme in the record as well, that sort of uncertainty and living in a kind of like an uncertain world is hard. I
Yeah.
don't know whether it's how I'm now because I think about it more, but and whether it's more getting more responsibilities as you get older, but it just feels it used to things used to feel a lot more certain than they do now, and
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we're kind of like as humans. I mean, some yeah, of course kind of creativity can kind of thrive on a bit of uncertainty, and a lot of things do thrive with uncertain environments, but um, perhaps not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't
It's
know.
hard. It's very hard. What about another kind of characteristic that I'm sort of interested in is curiosity.
Mm.
Whether you would sort of call yourself a curious person.
Um, I think so. I hope so. Um, I think yeah, I mean it depends what in regards to what exactly, but I guess it doesn't really. I think I've noticed recently that I maybe from being around I have a couple of friends who are either diagnosed or undiagnosed with autism.
Mm,
Um, and one in particular, one of my closest friends, uh, I think I have the privilege of quite close witness insight
mm,
into the way her brain works and how she gets like really, I mean, curious is a weak word for her. She gets obsessed with certain
mm,
topics and like it goes into deep dives about like um nuclear bunkers or
yeah.
submarines or mountain disasters and that kind of thing.
Mm,
And um actually I went to a talk with her a couple of months ago, a really random event in our neighborhood
mm,
with this guy who we thought it was going to be about one thing and then it was kind of not it didn't quite live up to the title of the talk. It was kind of just this guy who there was this artwork in Utah. I
mm.
forget who it's by. It's quite famous. It's like the Salt Lake spiral thing. And
Okay.
he stood up and kind of just talked about what he loved about this artwork. And then kind of the rest of the talk was a Q&A where basically people ended up talking about why we get obsessed with certain things, and it made me think about the fact that I uh I get obsessed with things in really short spurts and I never get
Mm.
to the bottom of them.
Ah, right.
um
Yeah, yeah.
outside of the context of autism, that's just an example of like
Mm,
proper obsession.
mm,
But I think I just so a topic comes to like floats before me, and I'm like, oh wow, I love this. I want to read everything about it, and
yeah,
I'll buy like half a dozen books about it, and then I'll only read two.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then I kind of it floats away, and then the next thing will come along. Um,
Mm,
and I'm not sure what that is. I'm uh maybe as non-committal to the things
mm.
that I'm curious about as I am to my friendship groups.
Could be. Yeah,
Just
it could
so that could be the same theme.
There
Yeah,
you go. There you go. You got two. You got a common theme there.
yeah, we really have.
Oh,
But
that's
I can't really
fascinating.
think of I am like I'm genuinely curious about a lot of things, but I just can't dedicate myself fully to any
Yeah.
one thing properly. I
I
really
I
wish
know
that I could.
I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. Like there are some things that I think about and I think, oh, I kind of quite like to either know about that or to get involved with that. And
Mm.
I have to think really hard. Maybe this is like the analytical
Mm.
side of me coming out again, but I have to kind of think really hard. Okay, is this something you really want to do? It's like, and then I think of all I try and think, I don't know, like 15 years ahead. It's like, okay, well, that's going to be a lot of work. And then
Oh wow.
and then I can't. Yeah, then I start to think, should I make a commitment to that? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe making a commitment to things, is that part of it as well? Oh my God! You see, you start to realize, don't you, like how
Wow.
like connected and how many different aspects of stuff are they're just so intertwined. Oh my God!
Yeah.
I'm going to talk myself out of doing anything ever again.
Yeah, it sounds like you have quite a good mechanism for doing that. Um,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Eventually, I eventually just like analyze it so much I taught myself out of doing it. No, actually,
well,
I did something. I did start doing something that I hadn't done before. So alongside this podcast, I do like some music writing as well, and I started doing it on my own about a year, just over a year ago. And to do well, I I'd never done any sort of graphic design before in my life, and I took an online course. It was about just a short one, about sort of 4 or 5 week course, where I could just learn some basics and then take it away and start to develop it on my own. That is something I would never have done a few years ago.
wow.
Even to sort of make that commitment to do that. And do you know what? I absolutely love doing it now. I love doing it. I've kind of found my own style, and I surprised myself no end when I when I did that.
Wow.
It was kind of so unlike me to do that. Where it was my almost like my initiative to kind of do it. It's really weird. I'll
It
never do it
sounds
again, mind you, but
wow.
but
Well,
yeah,
it sounds like you have like a a good capacity to dedicate yourself to something if you really want to do it. Um, and
yeah. I guess so. I guess sometimes I'm a bit hard on myself, and don't think of it in those terms. But yeah, I guess I can do.
I'm really
Um,
impressed. I don't think I could make myself do a 4 or 5 week course in anything. My obsessions don't last that long.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, for that one that's worked, there'll be quite a few others that haven't.
Yeah,
I guess it kind of finding the right one and one that
yeah,
you know I don't know whether there's a kind of instinct that this is what you like.
mm.
It's something that you kind of like attach a value to it. I don't know. Um,
You
it's
know, I find myself thinking of like different sort of sizes. Like I feel like the curiosity is kind of like a maybe like a little whirlpool or a tornado, and I don't know, there's an energy of there's something about the things that you're being curious about
mm,
that is pulling them into your orbit. And I feel
mm,
like there's like different sizes of these whirlpools going on in different layers of your life at all times. And what's coming to mind is like for me, I think that the biggest umbrella one of all is music in capital letters or whatever,
mm, mm,
and everything that comes within that, because there's so much to be explored in the world of music, and also to use music as a means of exploring things in the world.
Mm,
Um, and then there's the process of making an album in
yeah.
which that is actually not for everybody, but for me, it's for all my records so far, it seems to be like generally about a 4 year
For your sort
process
of cycle.
between,
Yeah.
yeah, between like the first song and realizing that it's the beginning of a new chapter,
Mm,
and then like as it becomes clear what you're writing about, I think you start to become extra receptive to um the topic that is already within your grasp, and it kind of
mm,
expands. And um for example, the record that I'm writing right now, as
mm,
I started writing it 2.5 years ago,
yeah.
and it started with a song about silence. And
Mm.
um, ever since then, I'm still on one. I'm still reading about silence, and and exploring it. But it's taken like different. I've in the last few months, I'm just all I want to write about is like night and
Mm,
darkness. And then I got obsessed with space for a
yeah.
bit recently, and I don't know, all of this is sort of within the realm of a longer energy of curiosity, but it like has a frame around it.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and I guess for me, I feel like I think this is just the way my brain works, but I feel like I need a frame around my curiosity so that I have like a good enough reason to
mm,
delve deep into something.
yeah.
Otherwise, maybe it's too overwhelming otherwise, or maybe I just don't let myself play enough, as in, I don't know, get really interested in something totally random and then read up
Yeah.
loads about that. I don't think I'm very good at allowing myself that level um of like actual childlike curiosity.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good point because it does get drummed out of us quite early by the system, really.
Yeah,
Once you kind of get into school, certainly into sort of secondary school, it's very much not about
yeah,
that. It's about, kind of you know, do, doing your exams and getting your head down and blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
curiosity is just like and play, it's just like so important. And I do think we tend to lose sight of them, as we get older, and responsibilities and play gets put on the back burner, doesn't it?
yeah,
Um,
it
but
does.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Sophie, listen, it's been fascinating to talk to you. I guess we better
Great.
better kind of call it a day there. But really,
Yeah.
really great to talk to you. It's been really interesting listening to how you've about your life, about how you've approached things. It's been great, and there are some
Oh.
parallels. It's always interesting to speak to another only child, and kind of compare notes for from childhood and stuff. Because I think they really do inform how we grow as people and move through life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah, we all cope in different ways, don't we?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
oh, Giles, it's been so nice with you.
Oh, thank
It's been a
you. It's
very
been great.
different kind of conversation, and I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's
Thank
been
you so
great.
much.